Hello?
Hello, this is Paul.
Hey, man, how are you?
Welcome down the rabbit hole, friends. Paul Ferguson once hoped to become a part of Hollywood by selling his story and maybe becoming even more infamous for the crimes that he committed against his own flesh and blood.
I'm doing good.
Well, it's good to finally meet you. Sorry I was having a hard time last time.
So this gentleman that is speaking to Paul is allegedly from a pretty big TV network. A lot of people have argued back and forth about what's going on here, but the rumor on the street is that one, either this guy totally fabricated who he was, or two, this is for real. And this guy is actually living in the neighborhood in which this crime happened. He rented a house there, and he is working on a documentary about the Fergusons and Vander Arks.
Yeah, system's glitchy.
Well, no, the weird thing is... hold on.
So I have about 45 minutes of jail calls with my friend who we'll call Mr. Hollywood, okay? And Mr. Hollywood has a lot to say to Paul about the potential of using his story. I'm not going to share all of the calls here because, to be quite honest, a lot of it is pretty boring. But I did want to go through and kind of talk about several points which I feel are important. The first of which is that I see a drastic difference in Paul here in this call, in his mood and the way he acts. This was before baby girl got a hold on Paul and started to make him feel like he never did anything wrong and the justice system is the one that messed up in this case. In this call with Mr. Hollywood, we hear a downtrodden, depressed, unsure of himself kind of Paul who doesn't know what's going to happen next. He's awaiting sentencing, but he's been found guilty. And in the beginning, we really hear a different side of Paul.
They had to postpone it because they wanted to do a thorough psychiatric evaluation.
To you or your mom?
Me. Sean does it in 3 days.
Are you guys basically getting tried separately at this point?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is from the first part of the call, but you should know I've already deleted some of it because it was boring and monotonous, and it's basically Mr. Hollywood going over how he has a lot of trouble working the phone system, but he brings up, like, I have plenty of money. I can pay as much as I need. I just have to keep putting my credit card on it because I don't know how this works. I've been all over the world doing interviewing all kinds of people in jail, so I got plenty of money on the JPay, but can't figure it out. So he kind of goes on and on about that, and the entire time Paul is just like, okay, whatever. I get a sense of Mr. Hollywood being a little bit sleazy. That's just my opinion. Just the way that he talks, the way that he acts, the air that he gives off. He's definitely Mr. Hollywood to me.
And right, so basically, I'm going to give you the update. Hold on, I got to yell at my wife in my neck.
So this guy, Mr. Hollywood, reintroduces himself to Paul, and he lets him know, this is the film company that I work with, and this is what we're looking for from you.
What you have kind of went through. We're interested on the kind of more the angle of the Stockholm Syndrome, kind of what you went through. Not necessarily your mom yet, but we're very interested in your story, and we kind of like to talk to you.
So Mr. Hollywood wants to let Paul know that he's entering into this idea of making a documentary and focusing it more like Paul is also a victim. There's a Stockholm Syndrome going on here with Shonda. Now, is Mr. Hollywood really thinking this, or is this just a way to convince Paul to provide information, to interact with him, to give him some of the story, to convince Paul that he's not going to be portrayed as a monster? I would say, based upon what I've learned over, the very little knowledge that I have over my time working on YouTube and getting to know how, very minuscule things work, is that when a studio approaches you and they want some information from you, they don't tell you what they're really up to for the most part. It would take time. It's like down the road road, after you've spoken to them for a while, after maybe you've signed a partial contract or you meet with them extensively, then they might give you more information about what's going on. But in general, when they meet with you and they give you some kind of an idea of what they're doing, it may not really be what they're up to. Whatever they're going to do may not benefit you. So I listen to Mr. Hollywood's words with a grain of salt. He may be only saying this to ensure that Paul agrees to work with him.
And kind of really get your story unedited and kind of, kind of your in your own words.
Sent an email earlier agreeing, but after talking to a couple of family members, I will need a little bit more time to consider.
Right. So, okay, Trish, especially his stepmom who helped raise him, I've got some phone calls with her, and I know she brings up repeatedly, like, I don't trust these people. Are you sure these people are who they say they are? Even if they are, why would you want to put your business out there, Paul? Like, they'll manipulate it. Don't believe anyone. They're going to lie to you. Trish says this over and over again in some of the calls that we've heard and that I have available behind the scenes as well. And also Trish is very much upfront with Paul in a lot of instances and saying, like, you did some really horrible things. You made some horrible choices. Do you really think you want a movie made about this?
Of course.
But I just want to make sure that none of this will be incriminating towards me or my family, because they don't deserve that.
Of course not. Well, here's the thing.
Of course not. His voice went up like 2 octaves. No. First off, Paul, you cannot control the narrative about what happened. We'll listen a little more to what Mr. Hollywood has to say, but the reality is he cannot promise Paul that the perspective they're ultimately going to take is not going to, quote unquote, incriminate or be negative about Paul or anyone else in that family.
What I will say is, in being completely honest with you, this is being recorded, right? Besides me and Palos Films or whatever, but the state is recording it. So, So I guess we could basically skirt over. How I would basically say is, let's skirt over the stuff that might be incriminating, and let's just talk about, who you are, how you grow up.
From what we now know about Paul, who he is and how he grew up is probably pretty incriminating. Let's be honest. It's really sad, but so much of what we've been able to uncover about Paul, much of it thanks to other true crime reporters like Sav Girl, but also, family members and people who've stepped forward and talked about what was going on with that family, like behind closed doors. It all kind of gave us a picture, a portrait of a family and a child or several children who are being neglected, who are acting inappropriately long before the murder of Timothy Ferguson took place.
In that kind of realm, and then maybe skirt over it until we find out basically what I don't want to put it this way. We don't want to incriminate you as well in any sort of way, but
of course
we do feel, so basically
Mr. Hollywood is doing a big song and dance. Quote unquote, we don't want to incriminate you in any kind of way. That doesn't mean that there's some kind of a contract here saying that negative things aren't going to be brought up in this documentary, in this show, or whatever it is they're supposedly making Paul. Like the wheels of Hollywood will turn, right? Like if this documentary ever does come out, I'm probably going to watch it. I think many of you will as well. There are laws that prevent Paul from, making money off of his crime, Shonda as well, but there are ways to get around that. I mean, one of the ways, which we've kind of talked about and we've seen it play out in these jail calls, is by finding a new special friend, maybe someone that you get married to, or even if you don't don't get married to them, for them to be able to sell phone calls that you've had with them or information that you've obtained by spending time with them. Baby girl and the woman who is dating Shonda, they could make money off of this documentary and other endeavors and then funnel that money back to Paul or Shonda. How much of it they'll funnel, who knows? I mean, it would be interesting to see if people like Paul and Shonda get swindled in the end by some of these people. But it's difficult to know that Timothy Ferguson suffered over and over again, day after day, with Paul and Shonda knowing that he was cold and hungry and sick and alone, day after day after day. And now they get to sit in a prison, which I'm sure is not the most comfortable situation, but they have access to phones and games and food and blankets and other people to talk to and making friends on the phone because they're so infamous. It's difficult to really see how one form of torture equates to what the punishment is for Paul and Shonda.
And so the trial and your mom and your brother at some point, that's going to come later in the fact. But I really want to kind of get to know you and get your side of it unedited and kind of outside the realm of the court case, because obviously...
Okay, so I redacted a lot of this just because it was monotonous and boring, and basically Mr. Hollywood is saying to Paul, look, we'll have your testimony, and we're going to have Shonda's testimony, and eventually maybe we'll even talk to other people and have information from them. But what I'm really looking for here is an interaction with you where I get your point of view on what happened. What was your childhood like? What was your point of view about what happened over the past 10 to 12 years?
Obviously it kind of doesn't portray you in the greatest, I guess you could say, light. But I want to know who you are. I want to know who you are prior to or now, I guess you could say. Story, or the whole story, I guess is fascinating and nuts. But especially when it comes to you, because I think you were somewhat as a victim as well. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's the thing that kills me, in a sense, is like...
That is exactly what Paul was waiting to hear, right? Okay. At this point in time, once again, he's been found guilty. He's awaiting sentencing. He's very nervous. And he has not yet created this magical relationship with the baby girl. So he doesn't really have anyone telling him like, Paul, poor Paul, you didn't do anything. You poor guy. Nothing you've done was wrong. You're the victim here. You are as much as a victim as Timothy was, So I believe Mr. Hollywood knows that that's what people like Paul want and need to hear. And this is a way to get Paul to join the project.
You were basically put in this position because you're a mother, and there's all this backstory and there's all this stuff that wasn't able to be told in a courtroom.
Oh my, there is such a big backstory on this family. That's why it fascinates me. That's why I brought it to my channel. I plan to do more about this case, more about this family, about the psychology of what's going on here. It is quite extreme. It's fascinating in a sick and sad way. And one of the reasons I really want to look at it is because for me, in the types of jobs I've had in the career field that I work in, working with children with special needs and children who have committed crimes, I really want to focus on learning how, and through scientific exploration, finding out how we can better prevent crimes like this from occurring, right? That's a big theme in my life. And when we look at Paul Ferguson and Shonda Vander Ark and everything that happened to Timothy Ferguson, in my opinion, and I get a lot of slack for this, we all know, a lot of you don't like it when I say this, I do believe Paul is a victim. I believe every child in that family was a victim. Shonda and the other adults, they had time. They had rough childhoods, not easy, not perfect childhoods, but they had time to learn, to grow, to seek out help. They had community services that were intervening and trying to help them and their children. But Paul, everything that happened with him, the crime that he committed, the horrible things that he did, he really didn't have time to grow, learn, or have some kind of intervention done to help him become like a stable adult. So I do see Paul as a victim. I believe that he needs to have consequences for his crimes. I do not believe it would be safe to release him from prison at this point, but I also still see him as a victim.
Me personally, in my opinion, I have no problem with it. I want to be able to send a message to people out there who are maybe not in the same situation, but similar ones, and be able to, take a step forward, get themselves out of it. I want to be able to send that message to them. And I guess part of it is I want to be able to redeem myself for everything.
So sad, because I see a pattern when it comes to true crime nowadays. I feel like so many of these offenders go straight towards like, well, I want to make a documentary to redeem myself, or get a TikTok account, or, become really famous on social media. And that'll just help like everyone know that what I'm doing is I'm trying to help people. I want to prevent this from happening again. They'll say things like this, but making a documentary and getting a TikTok and becoming famous on social media is not redeeming you from torturing and killing your brother. There is harder work to be done, work that should be getting done inside of the prison system that oftentimes isn't. There's real ways to give back to the community in which that person lives, even if they're part of the prison system. There are real ways to make a difference. And it's hard to hear Paul kind of falling into what so many other offenders that are famous, that are infamous, are falling into. It's this idea that like, I'll give back to the world and I'll redeem myself by, getting involved in Hollywood. Like, that's what's going to make it all better.
Know what kind of message I would want to send, but I do know that part of my story that I'd want to send would have a message, something meaningful, something that people can look at and others can relate to. I've never really been a leader, so to be able to at least do something similar to being a leader is good enough, I suppose.
It's sad because basically what Paul is saying is like, I've never felt good about myself and I don't feel good about myself right now. So how can we use this documentary to make myself feel better? Like, what can we do with this that will make myself feel a little less terrible than I feel right now? And it's unfortunate. I mean, I feel sad. I feel badly for Paul, but a part of reclaiming, the reality, like learning to deal with the reality of the crime that you committed, is going through a pretty heavy depression when you realize how bad it is, how bad what you did truly is.
I mean, I failed my brother, and there are probably thousands, if not millions, of people out there who are in a situation similar, and
sigh, long sigh, because no, there are not. There are not thousands, millions, whatever, of people out there who are in a similar situation to what happened to you, Paul. That's why, therapy, extensive therapy, is what's needed for you to understand that this kind of family system is not normal. It doesn't happen on the regular. I mean, of course, there are some people out there who have experienced it, but nothing like what Paul and Timothy and Shonda were acting out in that home.
I could be maybe not a positive example, but an example of just how bad things can be. But because I don't want anyone else to have to end up like Timothy did. It's an image that it never goes away. It's always there.
Notice how Paul says it's an image that never goes away. Like, it's only from his perspective that this is so bad. Like, I have to live with the image in my head of what happened to Timothy. Well, what about what actually happened to Timothy? What about Timothy's feelings? We definitely see, even in Paul's greatest attempt to show like how sad and sorry he is, it's all about from his perspective, how this hurts him and bothers him and the image that he will always have to live with, instead of thinking to himself, oh my God, when I look back at what happened, I realize that this human being was treated like lower than an animal in our household, that he, Timothy, must have felt scared and alone and desperate for some kind of help. And that's really what I want any kind of documentary to be about. So it's difficult to hear Paul express everything just kind of from his point of view. There's about 20 minutes more of this phone call, and I'm going to share some more in the future, mainly the parts where Paul speaks about what he wants out of this Hollywood documentary. But for now, we'll take a break, and my next video about Paul will have to do with Paul's secondary friend. Paul calls her Katie in these phone calls, and I have so much to say about what's going on with Paul's friend Katie. Thank you so much for joining me here tonight. I hope you'll join me again as we head down another rabbit hole.